Hi, everyone, and welcome to Internship and Job Search Strategies. My name is Rebecca Nelson, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the Career Planning and Development Center at Webster University, a centralized career development office located in St. Louis, Missouri, providing individualized career development support to undergraduate and graduate students across Webster University's network of campuses and online programs. Today's webinar is being recorded, so a follow-up email will be sent to attendees by the end of the day tomorrow. That will include the presentation materials for our topic and a link to the recording. So that will be sent to the email address associated with your Handshake account. Additional information in our post-webinar communication will highlight future Career Planning and Development Center events and how to schedule a career advising appointment with your designated career advisor through Handshake. So to assist with the sound quality of the webinar, please keep your microphone muted throughout the duration of the event. If at any point you have questions about the information discussed during the webinar, please use the chat box to communicate your questions or comments, and I'll reserve time at the end of our session to share questions with our presenter. So today's webinar is internship and job search strategies. During this hour, you'll learn strategies for effectively conducting a search for full-time employment, and internships and best practices on navigating the application process and following up with employers. Our presenter is Carrie Lee, Assistant Director for Career Development and the Career Advisor and Liaison to the Walker School of Business and Technology and the School of Education. Carrie works individually with students in a multitude of career development areas, including our featured topic today. So with that, I will hand it over to Carrie.
All right, great. Thank you, Rebecca. So we're going to kind of talk about how to approach this process when you are looking for internship and job opportunities in terms of strategy, being able to do some research, and then talking a little bit about kind of that application process involved and following up with employers. So in terms of learning outcomes, obviously kind of figuring out some strategies that you all can implement as you're searching for opportunities that are going to be a good match for your skill set, understanding how to diversify your job search approach, and becoming familiar with the application process, some different strategies to think about and resources, and then kind of those best practices and next steps. So as you're kind of getting started with this process, the first thing that's going to be really important for you is to identify and define your goal. So whatever that might be, if you're looking for an internship for summer 2021, if you're going to be graduating in December, you're going to be looking at full-time positions, thinking about what types of roles. Are you interested in any particular setting? Do you want to work in a nonprofit setting? Are you going to want to work in the corporate world? What types of interests and positions do you have? So having kind of a clear goal of what you want to do is going to help you navigate this process. And then you want to kind of create a timeline for yourself. So in kind of a typical world, you always want to be essentially kind of searching a semester ahead. So it usually does take several months to kind of research, apply to positions, and ultimately obtain either that internship or full-time job. Because when you're thinking about it from an employer perspective, so once they know that they are going to be hiring, summer interns, full-time position, whatever that might be, they're going to post a position. So that might be for, 2 weeks, a month, could potentially be longer than that. they're going to have to screen through all of the applications to find applicants who would potentially be a good fit, identify who they want to interview. There may be 2 rounds of interviews determining who they liked best, who had the best skill set for that role, and offering that position. So it definitely can be a lengthy process. So it's always good to get started early, and especially kind of thinking about the current economic environment, because things are likely going to be a little bit more competitive. You definitely want to be searching as early as possible as you're starting to reflect on this process. So this is kind of that general timeline. So you always want to start off as you're planning, you're doing some research, actually executing the search. So as you're finding those opportunities to apply for, finding things of interest to you, having your application materials together and a process to apply, that kind of contact, following up and networking, and then interviewing, and then ultimately getting offered a position, potentially doing a little bit of negotiation with salary, and then starting that new job. So a couple of things I want to point out. It's really important to kind of have an organizational process as you're starting to put together your job search strategy. So for instance, we have a link here, and this presentation will be shared with you afterwards, in terms of application tracking form. And so definitely as you're applying to a lot of opportunities, it can get confusing pretty quick, where you're trying to think about, what applications have you submitted through like a company's own website or HR portal? Have you been applying to things on LinkedIn, Handshake, etc.? So having a process for what you've applied for, kind of general timelines for things, is going to be helpful, as well as having access to that information. So as you're applying to things, depending what systems you're using, sometimes they may save information and sometimes they may not. So I always suggest, saving a PDF of the job description when you're applying, because if you're going to be interviewing for that down the road, oftentimes those job positioning go down after it's closed and they're no longer taking applicants. So being able to refer back to that later on can also be really helpful for you. And like I mentioned earlier, you definitely want to be thinking about those goals, targeting what positions are of interest to you, and exploring related alternatives. So depending how that search goes, you may want to look at kind of alternative areas, things which should also maximize your skill sets. So ONET Online and the Occupational Outlook Handbook are 2 really great resources, and they both have a lot of information about different positions. So for example, if you're going into ONET Online, you can do a lot of great research to find out, what are sample job titles for a specific position, what does someone in that position do every day, what are average salaries, so both kind of a national average as well as divided down by state. So those are both resources as you're kind of thinking about what types of roles you're going to be interested in. So maybe if you're interested more in marketing, you want to do something with that, thinking about what are those different job titles that might come up. And then you always want to diversify your approach. So, sometimes students get kind of locked into this idea of, okay, you're going to be applying to positions online because that's how everyone includes job postings. And, maybe you have been on Handshake looking at opportunities, you're applying through Handshake, which is a great start. But you don't want to stick to only one strategy because you might potentially miss out on some other opportunities that are out there, and you're kind of missing out on some of those other components like engaging and developing your network. So you want to make sure that you're always kind of approaching things in several different ways to make sure that you're going to set yourself up to be successful. So we're going to talk about these 3 different areas a little bit more. So you always kind of want to start off doing some employer research. So you've set your goals, you've decided on what types of roles are most interesting to you. So you want to determine what companies are hiring for those roles. Where could you potentially work? And, something that is also going to be really key to your long-term success is finding an organization where you feel supported, you feel like it's a good fit for you, because that's something as you grow in your career, everyone does make career moves. You may not be staying at the same company for 20 years, but you want that to be a good experience. And so sometimes there are things that aren't necessarily right or wrong. It's just about your work style. So maybe you're somebody who really loves a lot of structure, very clear deadlines. That's something that's important to you for your work. So if you're looking at an environment, like for instance, maybe a startup company where, things are very flexible, there's not so much defined work hours or responsibilities because everyone's pitching in to help things because it's a smaller startup. So something like that might be really stressful for you. That's not where you want to do your work. Whereas that might be a great environment for someone else because they love a lot of variety. They love having more flexibility and autonomy. So things like that are going to be important to you as well. And then there are employer databases. So these are accessible to you through the Webster University Library. And so these are databases that have kind of overviews about different companies and industries for businesses in the US. So for example, Reference USA, Sorkin's, Hoover, Business Journal Book of List. If you're going to that link, you can just kind of select those business databases. You will need to log in with your main Webster information, and then you can access all those resources. So you can look for specific companies, you can search by industry. And so that can be a good way to identify some specific employers of interest. Like I mentioned before, ONET and the Bureau of Labor Statistics can help you determine some of those labor market trends and figure out kind of salary components. So that's something where as you're thinking about what positions are going to be hiring that are likely going to be in a more stable environment right now, that's a tool that you can use there. And then as you're kind of developing this list of employers, you're using that application tracking spreadsheet or, whatever other organizational system makes sense for you. But be sure to keep track of dates there. So if employers have reached out to you, maybe you've done a screening interview over the phone for a position, kind of jot down those notes, because I think certainly during this time of pandemic, I think all of our sense of times have been a little bit off. So you want to make sure you're aware of what's going on. And then some other resources that can be good for learning about specific companies are Glassdoor, Handshake, and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, you can always look for specific company pages. So for interested in Boeing, you can search Boeing, look at their company page. So they're typically going to have all of those positions that they're hiring for. Those are often going to be listed on Handshake or LinkedIn. You can find news about their company. So they're often going to share things like, oh, if their workplace has been nominated for an award, maybe they've been doing a lot of sustainability initiatives. So they're certified as a, platinum green building. That's something that they might share, something that might be of interest to you, or that you would want to ask questions about in an interview. Glassdoor, if you aren't familiar with that one, there is a component where individuals can leave reviews. So you can always take those with a grain of salt, but certainly seeing what consistent themes are coming out. So if a lot of people are saying, I really enjoy working at this company, there's a lot of opportunities for internal promotion and advancement, that's something that's good to know. Or if it's something where, kind of a consistent theme of something where you realize maybe this isn't going to be the best fit for you, that's something to keep in mind as well. And Handshake can also be a great way to find employers. So when you're on Handshake, under that jobs tab, you can always look at the internship job search postings that are active. But if you click under employers, so it's that sub tab within the jobs tab, you can actually find a list of all of the employers who've said they're interested in Webster students and they want to connect with you. So that can be a really great way because they may not have all of their positions posted on Handshake, but they may have other positions posted on their website, or you can find what companies you can target. So for instance, maybe you're interested in working in insurance in the St. Louis area. So you can use those filters to find companies to look for. And then certainly, using the Webster alumni network. So there is a alumni LinkedIn group. You can use the alumni search tool on LinkedIn to find where alumni are working around the world. So that can be another great resource as well. And then you want to work to find position openings. So like I said, you definitely want to be looking at a couple of different sources because some companies might prefer one over another. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing your opportunities. So Handshake is a great place to start because you know that they're interested in Webster students and alumni. But there are other sites out there as well. So things like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed is kind of a general catch-all site for a lot of job postings. If you've been doing research on specific employers, looking at their sites. And then professional organizations are another great avenue. So those are networks for folks in particular professions. So for instance, you might be a part of the American Marketing Association or the American Counseling Association. And so they typically will have industry job boards. And so depends on the association, but sometimes those job boards are public. So even if you aren't a member, you can still see those job postings. And that's going to be a place where those are all related to your field. So that's another avenue that I would always seek out. And then, like we've mentioned, connecting with alumni, talking to professionals in your field, that can also give you an idea of who's hiring in your area, in your region. And just keeping your eyes peeled for any news because you want to make sure that people are aware of what you're searching for. So if they have connections as well, that can be another avenue. And so we have information linked here. We do have a professional association membership program. So we typically have that each semester. So we will open it again in the spring semester where you can apply. And if you're selected, we will provide funding for you to join a professional association related to your major and career choice. So if that's something where maybe you do want to get involved, have that resource, but there's a little bit of a financial barrier there, keep your eye open for our emails. as we start that next semester. So something that I think a lot of folks tend to miss when they're job searching is engaging their network. So for employers, they typically have to post positions somewhere, but they're always going to be looking for folks where they have connections in common, they have more information about them than just that one-page resume that everyone's submitting. So if you're networking, if you're able to talk to professionals in your field, you're going to have a sense of what positions are out there, what positions might be opening up soon, that aren't advertised in a lot of places. So there are some different ideas for kind of developing your network. So this is one kind of example of a graphic in terms of what does your connection and what does those networking contacts look like. So a great place to start is certainly, within your majors. So you might have your advisor or a professor that you've had a couple of classes with, you're really close to. So talking to them and getting some ideas about, maybe some employers to look at, alumni that would be good for you to talk to. You might have some peers. So for instance, maybe you're doing, a master's program and some of your peers are working full-time and doing your education. So talking to them to see, what's their experience been like working at that company, getting a little bit better sense of culture at those places. If you're involved in the student organizations on campus, they may have kind of professional networking component where they bring in speakers. Your department might do that as well. So for instance, the Walker School Business and Technology, they'll often bring in speakers about different business topics, and same thing for other schools and colleges. So utilizing those opportunities, using networking sites like LinkedIn. So being able to identify alumni there, that's a really great tool. And then you can actually also use Handshake as well. So if individuals choose to make their profiles public, then you can see other student and alumni profiles. So that can be another great source to find folks who are working at a company of interest, asking them some questions. And then thinking about the experiences you've had. So you might have done some volunteering, you might have had an internship already or a part-time job. So, your colleagues that you worked with, your supervisors that you might be using as a reference, those could be contacts to talk to, because whether that's a position open at a company or nonprofit you used to work at, they may also have connections to other places as well. Thinking about kind of your own family network. So you might have extended family who, works at a company. So they might be able to give you some contacts of other people you could talk to or do informational interviews with. There might be some family friends. So make sure you're kind of utilizing that personal network as well. And then professional associations can also be another really great way to find folks. So sometimes they may have a directory on their website, or that may be something where they have information about networking opportunities. So that's definitely something that you can look into. And then other kind of volunteering or community engagement efforts you've been involved in. So take a minute right now to think about what could be people in your network that could be helpful for you. So these might be people that are working in your industry of choice. So if you're interested in accounting and you have an uncle who's an accountant, or your accounting professors, but they could also be people who may not be working in your exact career choice, but they might be working in a company of interest. So, they may be somebody who works at Ameren and you're interested in working at that company. So even if they're not in accounting, they might be able to kind of start that process and give you contact information for an accountant at Ameren who wants to talk to you. So take a moment right now just to kind of think through those different areas and who might be some good folks to connect with. So as you're kind of jotting down some notes, you're thinking about some different avenues that would work for your personal and professional network. A really great strategy is reaching out for informational interviews. So all informational interview means is having a conversation with a professional about their job and their career. So what do they do in their job every day? What's it like working in public accounting versus working in accounting at a department at a specific company? What kind of career trends are out there? What do they felt like help them be successful? So maybe they pursued a specific certification for their field. Maybe that was getting some specific experience or developing skills in software programs that are common for that career. So getting a sense of what strategies might be effective for you as well, and what advice they might have for somebody going into the industry. So it can be scary sometimes to kind of reach out, especially if they're folks where you maybe haven't talked to them in a while, you don't know them super well, but most professionals are pretty happy to talk about themselves. We've all had our own experiences of being a new professional, making a career change. So as long as you're kind of giving people a sense of who are you, why do you want to talk to them, they're usually going to be pretty willing to talk to you. So for instance, if you find some folks through the Webster alumni page and they're doing work that you find really interesting, reaching out to them to say, hey, my name's Carrie. I'm a senior finance major. I'm going to be graduating from Webster in the spring. And I would love an opportunity to talk to you about your career in finance, advice you might have for someone kind of going into the industry, and then see what they respond with, because that's going to be a different approach with you gathering information versus if somebody's just connecting with them, they don't say who they are, what they want, they're just looking for a job, and that person doesn't necessarily have a role in hiring, they're probably going to be less likely to follow up and connect back with you. So hopefully you've been able to do some networking now. You've done some informational interviews, gotten a better sense of what that process is like, what information you should be focusing on. And in terms of the actual application process, you're typically always going to need your resume, your cover letter, and your references. So you always want to follow the employer's guidelines because they may say very specific information they want. So for instance, things that they want you to mention in the cover letter, they might have some short answer questions for you to fill out. So if they ask for a cover letter, make sure to include it. If they say, we don't want any additional documents, don't include any additional documents. So follow their guidelines, but as a general rule, something that I think is really important these days is to make sure that you're writing targeted application materials. So it's easy when you're putting together your materials to kind of say, okay, here's my resume. You've proofread it. Maybe you've come to career planning, you've had your career advisor look over it. You feel good about it. And then it's just done. So you just submit the same application for every single role you're applying for. So that is something where, you may have a good base document, but you always want to make sure that you're targeting it, because that's really going to help you show why are you a good candidate for this specific position. So as you're looking for different postings, one might say they're looking for people with specific skill sets. So they might be, some software programs. And so if that's something that you already have knowledge in, that's something that you definitely would want to include on your resume. Versus another position that's a little bit different, they don't use those programs, so then you might want to take those off. You don't want to waste space on unnecessary things and focus more on another part-time job or internship experience that's really relevant to that. So you always want to be thinking about what is the employer looking for and going through that job description, because all of those qualifications, the skills required, the job responsibilities and tasks, you want to, as much as possible, address all of those key themes through your resume and through your cover letter. And cover letters really can be the difference between you getting contacted for an interview or not, because employers are always going to have their own perspective, individual recruiters. But at the end of the day, if they have two people with resumes that are both good, you have descriptions about the work that you've done, you have relevant experiences, a relevant degree, and one person has a targeted cover letter explaining how their skills would relate to the position, why they're interested in that company, and somebody else didn't turn in a cover letter because it wasn't a requirement, they're probably going to go with that person who submitted the targeted cover letter because they have a little bit more information about them. They know that they're more invested in that. And so, that's something that as you're kind of working through, you obviously want to be targeting, considering how your skills and experiences are related. So being really explicit about connecting the dots for them. And then also making sure to include, why are you interested in that specific company or that specific position? So why are you interested in working at BJC versus SSM Health or Boeing? What about that company interests you? So that can be something that might just be a sentence or two included in your cover letter, but you want to make sure that's addressed. So not just that, the company has a good reputation, but something that personally connects you. So maybe it's something about their mission and their values on their website. Maybe they have some new initiatives or new programs that they're rolling out that are really interesting to you. Maybe you did an internship at that company. Maybe you talked to a recruiter at the career fair and you made a good connection there. So that sparked your interest in working there. So taking that time is going to help you to stand out. And so we have a lot of great information on our website. So wherever you're at in the process, if you already, have written resume or cover letters before, but you just want some ideas for how to make your bullet points stronger, you can resource those, as well as, maybe you've never had to write a cover letter before. This is your first time looking for an internship. You're not even sure where to start. Those can be a great tool to help you get started, and definitely make an appointment with your career advisor, because getting individualized feedback on your application materials is also going to help you think through and create more targeted materials as you're applying. And then you also always want to make sure that you're following up with employers throughout that application process. So after you've submitted your applications online, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of that contact information. So, you might reach out to them especially maybe you've applied, it's been a little while, you haven't heard anything back, to say, hey, I'm really interested in the position. I was curious about your timeline, or maybe you had a networking contact. So for instance, if you went to the career fair and they mentioned that, Vanliner was going to be posting spring internships on Handshake, reaching out to them to let them know that, hey, we spoke at the Webster Career Fair. I applied for this internship posting on Handshake. I'm really excited about this opportunity. Thanks so much for your time talking with me earlier this month. So it's just kind of a way to help keep you in the front of their mind, because most people are not going to bother doing follow-up with employers. So it can be a good way to stand out. If you do have an interview, so whether that was from a career fair, you had a phone screening interview, or virtual interview, I would always suggest sending a thank you note. So email is typically the easiest way to do that. And you want to do that within that day or two after your interview, because again, that's going to help keep you at the top of their mind. And I will say, even working in career development, not everyone does a thank you note. So it is something that really can help you stand out. And it can be a really good opportunity to reinforce your interest in that specific position and company and your relevant skill sets. So sometimes you have those experiences with interviews where there was some question that you just had a hard time thinking of a response right away. They didn't ask you a question about something relevant that you felt like you wanted to share. So that thank you note can be a good way to work that information in. So to kind of add in and say, thank you so much for your time and consideration. I really enjoyed learning about XYZ. I also wanted to let you know that I've recently had, been elected to a leadership position in my student organization, whatever that might be, but that you're giving them a little bit more information and kind of connecting how your skills relate to that. So most of the time, you're not going to hear anything back once you send a thank you note, and that's normal. So unless you're asking them a specific question, so maybe something that has come up since the interview or you forgot to ask in the interview, then obviously they will likely reply to that. But otherwise, it still is going to be something that can help you stand out as a candidate. So if this will scroll down, this is what a thank you note example might look like. So as you can see, it's pretty short. This doesn't have to be a whole essay about why you're the best candidate for the position, but just being considerate, being professional, thanking them for their time, and putting in a specific point. So for instance, when they ask you if you had questions at the end of the interview, maybe you were really interested to learn about professional development opportunities at the company, or wellness programs. So something that they shared with you in the interview, that's a great point to include, because again, it also kind of helps keep it focused, helps them remember you more. And it's a great way to help you stand out. And if there is a situation where, you interviewed for a position, you felt really good about the interview, they said, they're going to be making a decision in the next week or two, you haven't heard anything back, it's okay to follow up. So definitely, I would say give it a little bit of time. So if you're asking about the timeline in the interview, that can give you a sense. You don't want to email 2 days after they interviewed because they haven't made a decision yet, because that is pretty common. Most companies aren't going to be working that quickly. So you want to give them kind of a professional time length, but then just reach out to reiterate that your interest did in the position still, and see if they had a time frame. So that's a professional way to do that, where you can get information, because it might just be something as simple as somebody was out ill on the interview committee, or somebody's on vacation for a few days. So it doesn't mean that you aren't still in consideration for the position, but just that hiring process might be taking a little bit longer than they anticipated. So it's okay to follow up, once, maybe twice, with some time in between. If you don't hear anything after that, I would just let it go. If they are interested, they will reach out to you eventually. So you don't want to be somebody that, emails them twice in 1 week because you haven't heard back yet. But beyond that, again, it is something where most people are not going to take the time to follow up. So it can just be another additional touch point. And then as you're really thinking about that action plan, like we talked about at the beginning, having those goals is going to help guide your process. Making sure that all of your application materials are targeted, focused, you have any social networking tools. So for instance, if you're a graphic design student, an art student, you might want to think about your professional presence online. So maybe building a website where you have kind of examples of your work, or an online portfolio. And there's a lot of places to do that. So things like Weebly or Wix or WordPress, where you don't necessarily have to be a web designer, have a ton of experience with programming to be able to utilize something and have your professional presence out there. It might be something where you are using LinkedIn, so including some examples of your work on your LinkedIn profile, making connections on there. But you want to make sure that everything you're sharing about yourself is consistent. So how are you presenting yourself in a positive and professional way to potential employers? And then set realistic goals for yourself, because certainly this is a challenging time for a lot of people. And so it might take you a little bit longer. So don't get discouraged if you're applying to things, you aren't getting a lot of interview requests, because it is a competitive job market right now. So, make sure you're being as proactive as possible, giving yourself some extra time and doing your best to get experience, because there's always different avenues, however things end up. So maybe you're really wanting an internship for the spring. And what happens if you don't get an internship offer? That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. There certainly might be opportunities for you to do internships later on in your program, but there might be some other avenues for you to gain experience as well. So, doing some other involvement, maybe volunteering, partnering with a nonprofit. So there's always kind of those different avenues to think about. And so that's something where you can always talk to your career advisor as well, to think about what are those next steps, what are all of those plans for yourself that you have. And, be patient, because it's really easy to get burnt out when you're targeting all of your applications, you're applying to a lot of things. So make sure that you're working on those, but giving yourself some time to have other things going on in your life, making sure that you're giving yourself grace. And like we talked about in the beginning, having that organizational system set up. So, how are you titling all of your application materials? So your targeted cover letters, your resumes, because that's, again, something where before you know it, if you don't have that intentional process, you have 12 different versions of your resume and you aren't sure which is which one is for what industry. So again, making sure that you're having that systematic approach. And then utilizing our resources. So as a student here, as a recent alum, using the resources on our website, attending our events. Handshake has a lot of great opportunities with employers, whether those are career and internship fairs, they might be an individual employer having an information session. So Bank of America talking to folks about opportunities at their company. So make sure that you're aware of all of those resources and you're utilizing those to be as successful as possible. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca in case you all have more specific questions.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I was, jotting down networking contacts and things like that, even though I'm not actively looking for a job. I thought it was a good exercise to kind of go along with you there. So if anyone has questions, feel free to start typing those into the chat, and I will make sure that Carrie responds to whatever we can in the time that we have remaining. In the meantime, I just want to make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing and relaying the information that we want to relay to you. So I'm going to launch a poll with just a few questions that I'd love your assistance in answering to just help us make sure we're doing our jobs. So I'll give you about a minute and a half to work on that. And then whatever questions you have, we'll ask to Carrie at that time. Carrie, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I wanted to just kind of get a sense from you, because you mentioned a couple of times that like we're in a pandemic, it's a hard time to look for jobs. How would you recommend that like students stay positive during the process, which might be a little bit longer than usual?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a couple of things. So I think setting, some realistic goals for yourself. So obviously, those long-term goals that you have, like finding an internship for the summer, things like that are great. But those kind of mini goals where as you're applying, if you're thinking about, okay, I want to send in, 5 applications this week, whatever that might be. So being realistic, because if you kind of go on these application binges where you're only focusing on that, you're sending all of these things at one time, it's really easy to get burned out quickly. So kind of trying to set yourself some manageable goals and give yourself some time off, as it were, where you're not going to be only thinking about job search, because we know that, you all have lives and family responsibilities and classes and everything else. So, making sure that you are searching early. So you're giving yourself time for this process where you're not going to be stressfully applying to things right at the deadline, so kind of giving yourself some time and space to think about those other important things in your life. And, getting feedback can also be helpful. So like I mentioned, reaching out to your career advisor to talk about your individualized search. If you have, a mentor, a former supervisor, a professor that you're close with, talking to them as well, because I think it's really easy to get disheartened if you're applying to a lot of things you're not hearing back. And sometimes there might be opportunities for you to just make a few tweaks to your resume that are going to help employers realize how your skills are connected more. And sometimes, students have great application materials. So it's not that they're doing something wrong. It's just that it's going to take a little bit of time for it to happen. So, kind of getting that external perspective as well to make sure that you are on the right track. But at the end of the day, too, it doesn't mean that if you don't get an internship, if the job search isn't happening as fast as you want, this isn't a reflection on your capabilities, because you can be a great candidate, you can have great skill sets, and sometimes things just, don't work out right away. And so that's okay. But like I mentioned, there's always ways to continue developing your skills. So even if you don't find an internship, what are ways you can deal with that? So, you might want to take some time to, volunteer, get involved with a student organization, take some LinkedIn learning classes on a topic that's relevant to your career field. So there's plenty of things that you can be doing, you can adding to your resume, even if some of those initial goals don't work out the way that you had hoped.
Thank you. By the way, if anybody has questions, but you'd rather not send them to everyone, you can, chat those to me privately. I'll keep you anonymous. We do have some questions rolling in though. So, Carrie, if a student is working on their graduate degree, and they already work in the in a field that's maybe related or somewhat related to their degree, should they put their graduate degree on their resume, or does it possibly make the prospective employer think that they don't have any time?
Sure. That's a great question. So in general, I would say I would usually default to including that information, because I think it says a couple of things about you. So first of all, if you're working and you're doing a graduate program at the same time, you have to have some gritty time management skills to be effective, right? To be able to do your coursework well, to still do well at your work. So I think being able to talk about that is helpful, because oftentimes those kind of graduate students tend to be more focused because they have that clear goal in mind. There's a specific purpose why they're doing this graduate program, why they're wanting to make a career change, advance in their career. So, I think that does say something positive about you. And I think it also kind of depends too on where you're at in the program, because if, you just started your program in fall 2, you've only been taking classes for 2 weeks and you're applying, maybe it's less important that you include your graduate degree on there. That's up to you. But especially if you're kind of already a significant way through the program, that's also something where you might want to be sharing about coursework. So if you've taken courses in your MBA that are more focused on finance, that's something that would be relevant, something that you want to share in your application materials that could help you stand out. That can be a really good source of information there. And then two, if you're kind of getting closer to graduation as well, that's not going to be such a concern for employers if they're concerned about, well, are you going to have enough time to devote to us? If you've clearly already been successful, you're halfway through your program, things like that. So, at the end of the day, it is an individual choice, but for most of the time, I would suggest including it.
Great, thank you. So, do you have any particular suggestions for an international student? And I'm going to assume this is someone who is seeking employment in the US, because it's a tough time looking for a job, as this person says. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I would say a couple of things as an international student. So first of all, in general, it takes international students a little bit longer to find a position than it does for domestic students. So that's usually just a function of, some employers are not able to hire international students. They may do some government contracting work. That's just something that they can't do, or that they may not want to offer, those longer term visas, things like that. So they feel like it doesn't make sense for them to hire international students when they're only going to be able to work for a year on that OPT visa, for instance. So being able to find those employers of interest is certainly possible, but it does take a little bit longer. So really, the international students that we've seen be successful are very proactive. So, taking as much time to do some networking, make connections. If that's joining a professional organization, going to networking events, whether they're, virtual, not necessarily in person these days, but being proactive, taking that time to do a good search and utilizing your network well is going to help you be successful. So beyond that too, I would say it's about making sure that you're sharing why you're going to be a good candidate for the position. Because as an international student, you're already showing a lot of those skill sets where you've had to be resilient, taking courses in what may not be your first language, adjusting to a different culture. All of these things are really great transferable skills. So make sure that you're sharing how you can be a great advantage for that company. And then I would also suggest definitely making sure that you're aware of those kind of visa processes. So if you're applying for CPT for an internship or OPT after graduation, doing that early, making sure you know those deadlines for things, what the process is, because again, everything is just taking longer to process. So that's definitely something where you want to be on top of it. And then talking to your career advisor as well, to make sure that you're really focusing on your individualized career and job search strategy.
Awesome. We have almost the exact opposite question, which is how do you approach applying to jobs abroad during this time? So the person asking is graduating in December with a degree in international business and was hoping to, be able to use that degree. And I would assume, maybe we have some other people in here with international relations or studies or degrees that they wanted to use abroad. What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things I would think about. So within Handshake, when you log in, if you go to that resources tab, the Career Center tab, there's something called Going Global. And so Going Global provides a lot of information about job searching in different countries. So that can be a great first step. So if you're thinking about working abroad, make sure you're kind of utilizing that to see maybe what are some good job posting sites, some good cultural information to know about hiring processes. So you're kind of doing your best to educate yourself, look for other resources online. And then definitely, again, that networking component is going to be really important. So utilizing things like LinkedIn alumni tool or, the alumni associations to find, hey, are there other Webster grads in this country? So again, even if they're not in your exact career of interest, getting a sense of what it's like from them, to work in that country, to work abroad as an expat. So definitely, utilize that network, make sure you're connecting. And then the other thing that I would say is just for this kind of specific moment is do some research to be aware of travel issues. So obviously there are some countries that have much more strict visa processes in general, so enabled to get a work visa, but then also being able to travel with the pandemic. Some of them have more stringent, isolation requirements, things like that. So that's also kind of something to think about as you're thinking about your interests. But what are countries where it would be possible for you to work? Because there may be some places at this point in time where it just isn't going to be realistic for you to be able to, get a visa, travel to that company at the time. So it might be something where you have those goals for post pandemic, and then what can you do for now? So again, thinking about those different avenues or strategies where, your kind of ideal situation of working abroad, or what are those backup plans if you don't? So maybe seeking out, what are companies that are multinational that have locations around the world that are US based. So even if you don't get a job abroad right after graduation, getting in at a company where there might be a potential down the road to transfer, to move, to get some good experience. So those are all things that I would suggest that you think about.
Oh my gosh, Carrie, thank you so much. I want to thank you for the knowledge that you've shared with us today. As I mentioned at the beginning of our session, you'll be receiving an email with the presentation materials and information about how to connect with the Career Planning and Development Center for individual assistance. Our next webinar is going to be Building Connections, and that's going to take place on November 18th at 12 p.m. Central Time. You can find more information about that session and registration details in the events section of your Handshake account. And so we will look forward to sharing that content with you. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.